Today we are going to be building an outdoor storage cabinet. It is early April here in Vermont and it is very cold. It's well below freezing at the moment and there is still a ton of snow on the ground, which means there's a lot of stuff we want to be doing but we just can't start yet. Our sawmill is still under a couple of feet of snow, as are our log piles. So today we are working on a project that we can do, which is to build a storage cabinet. Now, one of the challenges that we have here on site, we have this nice big shipping container, but it is a long way from our build site. Our build site is another few hundred feet up there, which means that at the start and end of every day, we have to shuttle tools and materials and things back and forth between the shipping container and up there, which is just frankly a bit of a pain each day having to do all of that. What we're going to be doing today is building a relatively small storage cabinet. It is roughly 4 feet square and about 4 or 5 feet tall, just big enough for us to store hand tools, power tools, those sorts of things in, as well as equipment, materials, parts, etc., as we work on different projects up at the house site. Previously, I had got all the 2x4s planed. These are our own lumber that we had milled and dried, got those planed, and just now I have put them through the table saw to rip them to final width. Let me talk through a little bit more what I've just done there. So we have a Sawstop job site table saw. It does have the safety feature on that all Sawstops have. So if something conductive, like for example your hand, comes in contact with the blade, it will fire a cartridge inside and stop that blade almost instantly, hopefully protecting you from any injury, or significant injury at least. I actually ran this in bypass mode, and the reason I did that is because I wasn't sure if this lumber was dry enough to go through without triggering the mechanism inside. Bypass mode essentially disables that detection, and so it is less safe in that mode. It's just like a regular table saw at that point, but it will tell you if it would have fired, and it went through the whole lot and didn't fire. So that's good to know for future. That wood at that moisture content is dry enough. In terms of what I did on the table saw, so I ran it through, our boards are full dimension, 4 inch by 2 inch. I planed them to 1.5 inches thickness, but they were still 4 inches wide. So I ran them through on the table saw twice. First at 3 3/4 inch, then I turned them round so that the cut edge was against the fence and ran them through at 3.5 inches, bringing their final dimensions to 1.5 by 3.5 inches, matching what you would find at the store if you went and bought a 2x4. To do that, I did keep the blade guard on. Since I was making a full cut all the way through the board, I was able to leave that on. I also put a featherboard on, although it wasn't doing a lot because it doesn't quite, even at maximum reach, doesn't quite reach close enough to do the real thin cuts that I was doing. It was just a nice backup to have there, just in case something slipped out, it would hold it pretty close to where it needed to be. In terms of the cuts I was doing, it was cutting off a real thin slice. I really wasn't cutting off much, but it was just enough to get the boards really clean and straight. So hopefully, without the use of a jointer, which we don't have, we've got pretty close to S4S, to actually having 4 square sides surfaced and ready to go. I was able to do this in bypass mode because I felt safe enough, given I was able to use a push stick and push the wood through, so nothing really was getting too close to my fingers, which kept things, I think, nice and safe. So overall, that was really quick. That went a lot faster than using the planer to do the stuff on the wide face. So now we have our boards. It's ready to start building. I should add as well, I did use, I don't have an outfeed roller, an outfeed table or anything like that. So we made this little sawhorse last year, in fact, a little over a year ago. We made it at the same time we milled all of this lumber. We used some of it green to build this sawhorse. It is awesome. It's rock solid. Nothing has come loose, even in over a year of just sitting out in the elements. It wasn't quite tall enough, so I just clamped a piece of 4x4 on top of there just as a roller. It was still a little bit short compared to the table saw, but it was only maybe 1 inch or so it kept things off the ground and pretty well balanced. Also generated a ton of offcuts here, real thin stuff. You can kind of get a sense for the variability in width when you look at some of this. Some pieces are really thin, others in here, as though coming off quite a bit thicker, so you can kind of see the variation we had there in some of the boards. But some of them, the board was so close on the first pass to 3 3/4 inches that the saw blade didn't actually cut a piece off, it just kind of trimmed the edge down. I am using a thin kerf rip blade on there, which works really nicely for jobs like this. So somewhat ironically, after cutting all that lumber of our own, planing it and ripping it to size, first thing we're going to start with is actually some store-bought lumber, not our own. And the reason for that is we're going to be starting with the floor assembly, which we are using pressure-treated lumber for. Obviously, our lumber is not pressure-treated; it's not rated for ground contact, and if you put it on the base in contact with the ground with moisture, it would rot pretty quickly. So we've got a few pressure-treated 2x4s that we're going to chop down to length using the miter saw to create the floor assembly. I'm going to be using, we have a Dewalt cordless miter saw that you see behind me there. I absolutely love this thing. Unlike the planer and the table saw, where I have to have those 2 generators running the whole time, this thing runs off 2 batteries, 2 flex volt batteries. It has actually surprisingly good battery life. It'll last a long time on a couple of batteries, especially the big 9 amp hour ones that I've got in there at the moment. It cuts really well. It is just as powerful as their corded model. I am a big fan of this miter saw so far. So I'm going to start cutting up the pressure treated 2x4s. Because it is pressure treated, I'm going to throw on a mask. I am outdoors and the wind is blowing, but I don't want to inhale any of that pressure treated dust. So I'm going to let that go into the wind, but otherwise keep myself protected. So before I start assembling anything, I had to cut some notches in these bottom pieces. So these are the kind of joist, the floor joist if you like, they're going to run across. They're upside down right now, so when they're the other way up, these pieces here, you can see, will have these kind of cutouts in the bottom. And I modelled these after ones that we got in a pallet, and the reason for this is so that we can lift it with the tractor. So I spaced them according to our tractor forks, so they fit kind of nice on the forks, as wide as I could get them to be on the thinner boards. You can imagine when these are spaced out, we're going to have this side rail here, and these will look something like that. And another one, that one there, will go across the back end. If you're wondering why we've got so many in here, the simple answer is that I needed at least 2. I didn't feel it looked solid enough with just one in the middle, which meant I needed 2. Unfortunately, we're trying to reuse some material, specifically those sheets up there of Advantec 3/4 inch OSB that are relatively weather resistant, and it's what we used on the solar kiln base. We'd also been using some offcuts on the shelves. Well, instead I'm going to use this OSB, this 1/2 inch OSB on the shelves, and I want to repurpose that more expensive 3/4 inch weatherproof-ish OSB to use on the floor here. I think 3/4 will be better than 1/2 inch. And because I've already cut those for the shelves, they're only about 21 inches across. So I'm going to need 2 pieces to span the floor here. The dimension this way across is about 45 inches. So I couldn't get 2, kind of one there and one there, it wouldn't fit. Which meant I had to go one there and one there. So I put the extra joist in to give myself a nailing point and to give those 2 boards a solid board, solid 2x4 underneath where they join. If you're doing this, you can probably get away with just 2, not 3 in there, but that's why I'm doing 3. Now that I've got these all cut, I can now start to assemble them. When I have, I can then get my 3/4 inch OSB sheathed on top, and that should be a pretty solid floor assembly the other way up. First thing I want to do is to actually paint that pressure-treated lumber. I am going to have to do that indoors though, because it's actually raining outside today, or it's not yet, but it's about to, I think. So I'm going to get that pressure-treated lumber, get up on these sawhorses, and get it painted. Try and get some of this dust off here. The reason I'm painting this is really twofold. One, it'll just give it a little bit of extra protection. This is going to be in contact with the ground, and particularly these areas where I cut, I have kind of diminished the protection of that pressure-treated lumber. The other reason is aesthetics. This won't be super visible. It will be largely underneath the structure. But you will just about be able to see the edges and the sides and things, especially if we raise it up on any blocks or anything like that. So I think some dark stain would look a little bit nicer than this kind of green colour that you get from pressure-treated wood. But it doesn't need to be anything super fancy. I'm just using some deck stain that we have left over from last year. It is a Behr premium waterproofing stain and sealer, which is apparently good for 10 years on decks, 25 years on fences and siding. I don't know what the lifespan is for a project like this. It's a little cold today. It's kind of mid to high 30s. This does say apply when it's at least 35, so we're kind of way at the bottom end of that. That said, I hope this should be fine for this application. It doesn't need to be anything too fancy. I personally really like applying this with a foam brush. I find that just the easiest, quickest to do. And if you put that foam brush inside just a Ziploc bag, then it'll actually last a surprisingly long time. I checked this morning. I've got a foam brush in a bag from several weeks ago when I did another painting project, and that's still pliable and soft, and I could have used that, but it was a different colour. I have put some cardboard down underneath here just to try and catch any drips, which are fairly inevitable. But there we go, there's the first one. But ultimately, this should be relatively quick. This is a pretty heavy stain, this one, because it's a sealer as well. So I'll get this going, and hopefully then, while this dries up enough for me to work with, I can start work on the next section. I've got these turned upside down because I'm not concerned about painting the top side of these, because that's going to be against the flooring sheathing anyway. I'll come back and get all the end grain at the end, but I like leaving a little section that I can move it with as I slide these over. Okay, there we go. One down. Several more to go. I've got all these pieces of pressure-treated lumber painted now. I'm going to give these an hour or two to dry, and while they do, I'm actually going to head outside with the mitre saw and start cutting down some of the wood that we milled, ready for the framing. I have my cut list, so it's time to get cutting. The tape would probably help too. Okay, so that is all the wood I've had left over from doing those cuts. That's not all of the cuts I'm going to need to build this project, but that is plenty to get me started on the sill plate, the framing of the walls, some of the top plate as well, and a little bit of the shelf. I've stacked them up according to their sizes, and once the flooring joists are dry, I'll be able to attach those together and then build the sheathing on top of that. For now, I'm going to start assembling one of the wall assemblies, because I can do that, because that'll go all onto the main base as a single piece. All right, I'm going to start on the framing work now. To frame this out, I'm going to be using these nails. These are 16 penny framing nails, so 3.5 inches long, and these are hot dip galvanized. Theoretically, this should be weather protected and everything, but realistically, it's an exterior wall on an outdoor structure. So I'm definitely going to be using galvanized nails for this application. When it comes to attaching the sill plate to the floor, I'm going to use some big screws, some screws rated for pressure treated lumber. All of this is just going into my 2x4s for now. So let's get started. Just checking my laptop design for the next piece to install. So I've got the 40 on there. The other end I need a 44.5, which should be one of these ones here. It's really hard working in these cramped conditions sometimes, but I do want to get on with this before that paint is dried, so that I can actually make some progress today. So this piece here is one of the ones I had to do with an angled cut, and that's just because of how I've designed the roof on this. And this kind of goes in the middle over here. In there like that. So I do need to be fairly precise about the location of this one, because it's how the height and the angle have to work just right. Okay, so here's one wall assembly. You kind of get a sense now for what this is going to look like. The roof line will come up here, there'll be another piece across there. And so that's kind of the size it's going to be. About that square and about this tall, obviously with the roof on top. One side without any blocking, one side mocked up. Let's do the other. Well, I finally got those walls put together. It was a bit of a struggle. Honestly, the hardest part was I'm dealing with fairly small pieces on a very slippery floor on my own, and trying to hold things in place while I was hammering them was a challenge. So in the end, I tried two things, both of which I did on the shelves I framed inside the shipping container last week. One was to use a ton of clamps, just gripping things, holding things together as best I could. Not always easy when you're trying to do a kind of a joint into a long piece, just as to hit it in from the end. That's not an easy one to clamp. So the other thing I started doing was using some construction screws. I've got some number 9 3-inch construction screws there. And so I would start each joint just by basically putting a screw into the end just to hold the piece in place. It does two things. One, it makes it so much easier then to nail into, because this piece is kind of held in place already, it can't slide around. Helps me really square up the edges, get things nice and flush. Second, it does add a little bit more strength. So nails are great at shear strength. These nails here will really resist that movement. But nails can pull out. Once I've got the sheathing on, the sheathing is going to hold everything together, so I'm not too concerned. But while the wall sections are at this stage, it is quite nice to have that extra strength in them as well. For, what is it, maybe a dozen or so screws, that made my life so much easier. Now, it's been a couple hours since I painted or stained the pressure-treated wood. That is kind of dry to the touch now. There's still some tacky, wet areas. I am tempted, though, to put some cardboard down on the floor here and see if I can't start getting to work on that. I think it would be good to see if I could get that down today, because I would love to get these wall assemblies on. You can kind of see how these are going to fit together. In my right hand here is one of the back wall pieces, and we got the well, other way around. I should do it, but in my right hand, I should say this is a side wall piece in my right hand here, and that's going to come in under there like that. There we go. And the other one on the other side, and that will start to give me the structure I need. But I can't attach these together until I have that floor assembly in place. So let's give that a go and see if we can't get that floor going. It's quite nice working on the floor of the shipping container because it is solid and it is smooth and it is flat, but it's not level. We are sloping actually quite a good amount in here. So you can't use a level to do your measurements. You just have to rely on checking everything is square, which works. This pressure-treated wood is so much heavier than the stuff that we've milled. I really don't like working with pressure-treated lumber, but in this situation it is the right material to use. So you can see I didn't paint or stain the underside of these. They'll be the top side later on. So as long as I get all of these the same way around, we shouldn't have any problems. And once again, I'm going to do the same thing as I did before, screwing in the pieces and then nailing them. And the screws really just to hold everything together. Make my life a lot easier. And again, just to confirm, these screws are rated for use in pressure-treated lumber like this. So if you use some screws, you'll find that the chemicals they use in the pressure treating actually don't survive very well, or sorry, corrode the screw, which doesn't survive very well. So you do want to make sure that you are using appropriate fasteners. If you are looking for what to use, these are the ones to aim for. No, they're not. I say that. These are yellow zinc plated, should not be used in treated lumber. Let me go and get my ones that are good. Well, there's a great example here of making sure you do the right thing. So I do have screws rated for use in treated lumber, but I've only got 2" or 4 3/4, and these 3s were kind of perfect. So I'm not going to be able to use 3s. I'm going to go with the 2s, I think, because all I'm really doing is holding things together. So I don't need a ton of holding force. It's just to get things in place as I nail things. So I think I'll switch to these 2" nails, but almost a little mistake there. It could have cost me. And do be careful if you're taking out these screws. They can get really hot, especially if you've used the same screw a few times, just as a holder. You'll find it does start to get pretty warm. Yeah, that's pretty warm to the touch, that one. And that's just from the friction of going in and out of the wood. The next thing I want to do is line up my middle pieces before I attach this other side, because that'll lock things together. The spacing for that, I've got 3 pieces to go in. 1, 2, 3. And I want these evenly spaced, but the most important thing is that the middle one goes exactly in the middle. I'm going to have 3 pieces, is going to give me 4 bays in here. So once I put those other ones in, I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4 bays. But if you want to work out your spacing, this piece of wood here is 37 inches long, this centerpiece, this gap here inside the 2 end pieces. So 37, I then need to subtract the width of these 3 pieces that are going in, Each one is 1.5, so that's 37 minus 3 times 1.5. 3 times 1.5 is 4.5. 37 minus 4.5 is 32.5. And 32.5 divided by 4 gives me about 8 1/8 or so, something in that range. I am going to line up 8 1/8, and that is going to be the bay spacing. So 8 1/8, that gives me the edge of that board. I then need to add 1.5 inches. So that gives me an 8 5/8, 9 5/8. So that is where that board should go. The middle one is easy, and I'm going to actually do that directly. So because it's 37, half of 37 is 18.5. If I back off 3/4 from either side to give me the width of the joist here, 18.5 minus 3/4 is 17 3/4. 18.5 plus 3/4 is 19 1/4. And that is where that stud is going to go. I like to mark these with an X. I will say, metric is a lot easier, but I'm getting better at this. Then I'm going to go from this side again. So we're going to go to 8 1/8, 9 5/8, which puts me there. And that is the spacing for my 3 studs. 3 joists, I should say. Using the right screw this time. Now I've got the middle one. And then final one here. Now time to sink some nails. All right, I got it nailed together. That went relatively okay. The last section there, as I was nailing through, the end piece split on me. So I've thrown some wood glue in there and got it back together, moved the nail to a different spot, and I think that's holding. I think at this point here, I'm going to try and flip it over. I'll need to prop it up on something so that I can keep those clamps in place. But I want to see if I can lay out the Advantec sheeting on here and just see how that fits, make sure it all looks good, and see if I can maybe even start trimming that. Quick recap then of where we are up to. So I got one side of the sheathing on, got it all square before I put the sheathing on, so that's holding the whole thing nice and square now. Started nailing the second sheet, decided this one to actually nail it in oversized and then trim it down afterwards. Started nailing in down the centre, and what I ran into was that some of the nails, particularly this set here and this set here, on that centre joist actually poke through those cutouts that I put on the bottom. So I will have to address that today. The cutouts are actually going that way. The piece is rotated 90 degrees from where it was before. So I think my first step this morning is going to be trim down this, get it all nailed in, trim this down, and then deal with those nails underneath. I'm probably just going to angle grind off the points underneath. They're not sticking through that by that much. I don't really want to leave a load of holes in there, so that should work fine. Okay, you can see now how this is going to start to come together. I have cleaned up the sheathing around the sides, so we're nice and square now. This will be the front, this side here. I have taken the angle grinder to those couple of nails in the middle, and I've put the nails all around the sheathing, around the edge, and a few kind of in the field, if you like, in this center section onto that joist. Realistically though, once I get the walls on, there's some giant screws over there, 4 3/4 inch screws that are going to go down through essentially the bottom plate, through the sheathing and into the skids, the bottom as well. So you can see how this is going to come together. The walls will be around the back there. I'm going to get those on next, try and get things in. I am working alone, so I always try and make my life easier. One of the things I've done is I've raised it off the ground onto a few blocks, which means I can get clamps underneath. So then as I get the wall sections on, I can actually clamp things in place. Well, the walls are in. I've started screwing it into place, so I've put one screw down here and one screw down here. Still got the clamps on. I got the spacing perfect at the front. You saw me there use the Craig jig, so I did use some pocket hole screws. That's these ones here. And that was to attach this top bar here and also a piece of blocking at the back. That's because of the design I went for here, which maybe it's not the best, but for something like this, I think it works okay. I was basically just joining these two pieces kind of face to face. So I wanted to get the pocket hole starting and following the end grain into a cross grain because it's a tighter, bites much better into cross grain than coming the other way into end grain. The problem with that, as you can see here, is twofold. One is I forgot to put the pocket holes in before I installed this piece, and second, I'd already installed the nails when I did this, and I managed to hit one of the nails and just about scraped this other nail here. So that was definitely a mistake. I should have drilled these pocket holes first to get this piece ready. Then I could have nailed and avoided the pocket holes there. I then actually screwed that side in and then realised then I couldn't get the Craig jig over this side, so I had to remove it, put the Craig jig on, repeat the exercise over here. Did a better job here of missing the nails. Still not maybe perfect, but that's going to hold. I'm going to see how I feel about that. I mean, it feels really sturdy. I can always put a piece of blocking just behind here and attach it to, in fact, all these three pieces to hold that secure. And I could probably do the same at the back. I could put a piece of blocking underneath, so it'd actually go kind of up under there, and same on this side, up underneath. And that would hold those two pieces together. Again, probably complete overkill for a project like this, so I'll just see how it holds up as I keep going. So for now, this is kind of assembled. The next thing I need to do, though, is put in the shelf. I haven't cut the wood for that yet, so I do need to cut all those pieces down. And the reason I've got to put the shelf in is because once I put the sides up, it's going to make getting into nailing that shelf much harder. And that's just a shelf that goes across from these two studs across to there, and it'll really just give us a bit more usable space inside this this little storage cabinet. Actually, before I cut the shelf supports, I need to put the rest of these screws in to attach that bottom plate now down to the base. So I'm going to get that. I got some new protective glasses. I had been wearing these, just an old pair of sunglasses, and the lenses are all chipped and damaged, and they're fine, I guess, but they're not really rated as safety glasses, and they're all like pretty nasty to look out of. I've been a really big fan of these Dewalt ones that I've been wearing, these like clear safety glasses. They're not expensive. I think they were like, I don't know, $6 or $7. They weren't expensive at all, but they're pretty comfortable and they don't fog up, which is really important. I find a lot of glasses fog up for me, and they also sell them as sunglasses. So I've got these. I feel a little bit like Neo when I wear them from The Matrix. They're pretty huge, but I guess that's just more protection for your eyes, and I'm hoping they work as well as the clear ones in terms of not fogging up. So I'll be trying out these today. And if you're interested in getting some, we will leave a link in the description below where you can find a pair yourself. All of these little offcuts that we get from trimming the boards down here, cutting them to length, we're actually saving even these small pieces. These are great for starting fires. Diana's up at the RV right now boiling maple syrup or boiling maple sap to make maple syrup. And we throw all of these on the fire at the start. Really gets the fire going well because this wood is really nice and dry. So we save everything. The slightly larger pieces, we've got a box inside. I use them, that's what's propping up the base right now, just a few pieces of scrap. Eventually we'll cycle through those and they'll end up on the campfire as well. That's the 4 pieces cut for the shelf. It's nothing fancy, it's just going to nail onto the other studs. I'll probably do the same as I did before and put some screws in as well, just to make my life a little easier while assembling. We're going to set the height of the shelf to fit some project boxes underneath. These are boxes that we found really useful, just plastic totes that we've picked up from yard sales or from the store, that we find works really well just to kind of load up with all the tools and the materials and the parts and the fasteners and things we're going to need for a given job. So we can load it all up in here, put it into that box and take up there. So I'm going to set the height of that shelf so that we can fit those underneath. I want to show you a really neat little trick here. So I've got a piece of blocking that I want to get in here, and it's just a really tight fit. It'll almost go. It's maybe like a 1/16 at most too long for this, and I'm pretty sure I just need to press these out just a little bit to get it in. I don't really want to shorten this because I think it's a good length. So what you can do is you can use a clamp. So this is just a Dewalt trigger clamp, and these larger ones have a button at the top. If you press that button, the top comes off and it can attach on the other end. And that way, when you squeeze the trigger, rather than pressing together, it spreads apart. So I can then put this clamp in between these two, open it up just a hair, put my block in where I want it, release the clamp, and there we go. That piece of blocking is in there now. I can just get that exactly where I want it. And that's nice and strong in there. And yeah, I can now nail that in place. I've got the shelf in now, and I've put another 3/4 piece of Advantec on there. Again, just scavenge that from one of the shelves that we had in the shipping container. I'll swap that out to some 1/2" OSB. I'd rather have the stronger shelf in here, to be honest. We're going to be piling some stuff in here. It's going to get used and abused, and I want to make sure it's strong and protected. And I tell you, this thing is strong now. This whole thing has just got so much strength, and I've not even put the sheathing on the sides yet, which will add even more strength. I did take the time, so with the shelving, I actually notched around the different cutouts there so that the shelf on here is really strong, and hopefully there aren't too many gaps for things to fall through. So there will be sheathing on the back of there, behind those studs, so that gives you a really nice surface there. The space underneath is plenty big enough for some boxes to go underneath, but we've also got the space at the front for taller things if we want to put any garden tools or those things in. It is not tall enough for the miter saw. We did consider making it so that the miter saw could go in, but you'd have had to make it really pretty tall in the front, and it just started to become a bigger project than we wanted to do. Right now, this is a fairly simple box, but it's going to be so useful for us. Next up, I need to get some sheathing on, and then I can start on the roof. Okay, we have the storage cabinet in the new location. Diana helped me lift it out of the shipping container. We can absolutely lift it, the two of us, at the moment. So it's not all that heavy. Carrying it on the flat ground is a little harder because you can't get your feet under as you walk. But by getting it out of the shipping container, it meant I didn't have to drive on the rubber mats because we've still got the tyre chains on the tractor, and I didn't want to tear up those rubber mats. Now that I've got it outside, I can get the sheathing on. I put it up on the blocks again, not to protect the skid so much, although it is easier certainly to put it down with a little bit more clearance underneath, but mainly so that as I'm putting the sheathing on, I can get clamps up and underneath to again make my life a little easier as I am working alone. I was looking at the designs for this last night, and specifically the roofing section, and two things occurred to me. The first is that it's actually going to be a lot easier to get the roof on before I put the sheathing on, because I need to connect the roof into the wall structure, and the way that I've done it and the size of this just means it's going to be a lot easier to get inside there and put all the fasteners and things on before the sheathing is on. Obviously that wouldn't be the case in a normal framing project, and I double checked, it should be absolutely no problem to put the wall sheathing on some OSB after the roof is on. That should be fine. The second thing that occurred to me is I'm not convinced my roofing structure is actually going to be super easy to connect to this. So the designs I did were really looking at sort of how it all frames together, and I don't think I was paying enough attention to how to actually join a lot of these things. This is very non-standard framing around the door and the tops in particular. We're on a slope which isn't super unusual for a roof, that's fairly normal. But particularly this top piece here, the way that joins on, you saw I had to use pocket screws before, that is unusual. And that's going to cause me some challenges later on. Part of this is because I didn't want to frame this up like you would a normal door header. I wanted to really maximize the space. So we've actually got a door coming straight off the side wall. We've got this vertically positioned 2x4 on top. So I think as I go, I'm not going to change my designs. I think I can make this work, but it is going to be a little bit fiddly. My goal today is to try and get the roof on, get it all, probably won't get all the actual roofing surface on the top, but if I can at least get the deck installed, the framing of the deck, that would be great. And if I can get the sheathing on the side of the walls as well, I'd be really happy with that progress. I really am just trying to fit in a couple of hours here and there where I can around other jobs that we're working on the site. I'm going to pull the miter saw out, and I need to start chopping down some more pieces of 2x4. That is the framing complete on the roof of this little storage cabinet here. This roof was probably more complicated than it needed to be, but it feels pretty darn strong. I did use a mix of fasteners. I put these, I guess like blocking pieces you'd call them in here. I actually used pocket screws to affix those to the one below, and then I was able to nail through from the sides into there to really hold that down. So there's essentially like 3 pocket screws on each of those 4 blocks holding that down. I then use those real long 4 3/4 inch screws here, here, in the middle, over there. So there's 6 of those holding it down as well. I also threw some extra screws holding it down in the middle. So overall, I feel pretty good about this. I think it's going to be plenty strong, and it feels pretty flat. Well, not flat, but you know what I mean. The slope is consistent. There will obviously be some sheathing on top and sheathing around the sides. I think that's probably going to be my next job here. I've got all the sheathing on. So just to walk you through what we've got here, we've got 1/2 inch OSB on the sides, on the back. I framed around the front as well, and also on the top. And that's all come out really, really good. I was a little nervous that the roof wouldn't be square or something like that, but it actually all worked out really well. I have made a few mistakes as I went along, things I definitely will learn from. This saw cut that I did down here with a circular saw, I was using a piece of melamine as a straight edge, and because it was across the full 8-foot length, I didn't have a good way to clamp it in the middle. And when I did that on the sawbucks, the sawhorses, the piece of melamine actually had a gap between it and the OSB in the middle where the OSB was sagging. And so the base plate on my circular saw slid underneath the melamine, and I hadn't realized. So it kind of wiggled in by about 1/2 inch or so. In the end, it didn't matter too much. I was able to work around that, and it's not been a major issue. And so I'm really happy with how this has gone. Plenty of fasteners went into this, probably way more than necessary. I wanted to make sure everything was really secure. But it's really sturdy, it's really strong. That sheathing going on really strengthened this thing up. It just tied everything together, gave it a lot more shear strength. When people talk about sheathing and how it adds that shear strength to a wall structure, I really get that now. It was pretty sturdy before, but now adding that in has just really tied it all together. Now, the original plan for the front, and the reason I'm going to stop here today, the original plan was a couple of doors. We're going to go in here, just two doors opening out from the middle. Looking at that now, I'm actually thinking of doing just one big single door. It would be a little over 3 foot wide as a door, so it's not crazy wide, but that means we just have one set of hinges. We don't need to worry about a sort of latching mechanism at the bottom to sort of lock one door. It just simplifies those things a lot, and I don't think we'll have any issues with that door sagging. So I think what I'm going to do is just frame out just one single door to fit that space. We're getting very low on lumber, so I've got 2 2x4s left, as well as a few pieces of scrap, but really not a lot. Now, although the framing is done, and that's what we're really using the 2x4s for, we are going to, so the next step for the walls is going to be some house wrap around the walls, and then we're going to put board and batten siding on there. Now, the board and batten needs furring strips. We'll probably do horizontal furring strips. We could do 45s, but I think maybe to keep it simple, I'll just do horizontal furring strips. And they're basically going to be 1x2s, which means ripping a 2x4 kind of into multiple pieces. Let's see if I've got a piece I can demonstrate with here. So if that's my 2x4 here, I'm going to cut that multiple times on the table saw. And so I should be able to get, I'm hoping, 4 pieces of 1x2 essentially, which is the nominal size. The actual size of a 1x2 is 1.5 inches by 3/4 of an inch. 3/4 times 4 is 3 inches, and so this is 3.5 inches wide. So even with the kerf, I should be able to get my 4 pieces out of a 2x4, and those will run all across here. So one 2x4 will go a pretty long way, but I only have 2 left, and that's going to be pretty tight with the door. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that with just what I've got there. So my backup plan is we've got a ton more lumber around here. And what I'm thinking is, these were a few boards that I rejected because they've got really quite a good curve to them going that way. Now on a 2x4, that's going to be a real nuisance to kind of deal with that as a board sort of to build with, whatever. But once I've ripped that down into 3/4 inch strips, those will bend really easily. They'll conform to the wall, no problem. So I think I actually might use some of these to make my furring strips. And then these are full dimension 2x4, so they are wider, and they won't be 1.5 inches, they'll be 2 inches, but that doesn't matter at all. They're just going to get hidden behind the board and batten siding. So I think my plan will be take a couple of those, rip those down on the table saw, and make my furring strips. As for the board and batten siding itself, one of the great things about board and batten siding is you can use green lumber. So yesterday we managed to get the sawmill head back up installed on the sawmill. We took it off for the winter. That's back on there now. And our log pile is rapidly emerging from the snow. Even though it's 60 something degrees now today, we still have plenty of snow around, and the log pile still has snow blocking it. Hopefully in the next couple of days that log pile will be free, and we've got a really nice pine log, the end of that big pine that we used on the driveway. We milled one big chunk out of it, but we've still got about a 4-5 foot long piece, so we're thinking of ripping that down to make the siding for this. Another day and I'm back at it working on this project. We actually got home last night to find that FedEx had made a delivery to this. They'd actually left a package or a letter just inside the cabinet here, which was rather surprising to us, but I guess they recognize it as a structure, which is a good thing. So today I want to get on the roofing and the house wrap around the outside. I may even get onto the furring strips. We'll see how we're doing for time. But if I can get the roofing on, I can get the house wrap on, that will sort of add some waterproofing to this. Obviously there is a giant hole in the front that I also need to make a door for as well. For the roof, we have decided to go with shingles. I have never done shingles before, so this is completely new to me. And when you look up how to do a shingle roof, everything assumes, for obvious reasons, you're building a much bigger structure than this. And I've decided to try and simplify things a little bit. We're not going to try and buy everything we need. I'm going to try and get away with drip edge rather than all the correct flashing all the way around, things like that. But I still wanted to do this as cheap as I possibly could. So I went into Home Depot, had a look at their shingles, and a single box or bag of shingles is way, way more than we need for this roof. So I went around and I found a bunch of damaged ones in one area, and I said to one of the store associates, would you do me a discount on these? And they were about $43 full retail, and he said, I'll give you $10 off. Are you interested? I said, sure, I'll take that for $33. I got to the checkout and they offered me another $5 off, so I got $15 off. So rather than paying $43, we paid about $28 for a pack of shingles, and some are damaged, but I don't think it's going to be an issue. We've got way more than we need to do this roof, I hope. We are going to put an underlayment down, a felt underlayment down. Again, I was able to pick this up cheap. That's not the kind of thing you can buy 16 square feet of or 20 square feet of. You have to buy a giant roll. I think the one I've got is something like almost 500 square feet. It cost me a little over $20, about $23. So I think all in, we're about $50 for the roofing felt and the shingles. The drip edge that I bought was, I think, somewhere around about $5, and I got a couple of lengths of that and some nails. So it's not an expensive roof. This is not necessarily done to the same level it's absolutely not done to the same level you would do it on a residential structure or a structure you really wanted to protect well. But at the end of the day, this is just an outdoor storage shed. If there's the odd little leak in there, it doesn't necessarily matter. I can always replace this roof very easily, but hopefully this should keep it nice and dry and weathertight. Before I do that, there is one thing I want to do, which is I want to stain this piece here, or these pieces around the outside. These are essentially the fascia boards of this roof. Again, keeping it real simple, I haven't added other boards on top of these. I do, however, want to stain these because the drip edge will loop over this corner. And once that drip edge is installed, it'll be really hard to get to this to stain it because it'll be under the drip edge. So I'm going to throw some wood stain on there. This is the drip edge that I've got that we're going to be using on the roof. It is just an aluminum drip edge. It's fairly small. It should be fine for this application. It has a little turned up section in the bottom and an overlap that obviously goes on the roof. There are 4 edges on this roof where I need to install the drip edge. We got the bottom, we got the 2 sides, and we got the top. Water flows downhill, so it's important to think about the layering as you do this. We've got the drip edge to go on, we've got the underlayment, and we've got the shingles themselves. So starting at the bottom, you need to have the bottom layer on first. In that case, it's going to be the drip edge. We want the drip edge to be at the very, very bottom. and the underlayment will overlap that. The drip edge on the side will actually go on top of the underlayment. So down here at the corner, I'm going to have to do a fancy little corner where I kind of want to fold the bottom piece of drip edge around the corner by an inch or so to give it an overlap with the side piece when that goes on. Then we'll put the underlayment on, then we can do the drip edge down the side, and then the drip edge on the top will actually go on top of the shingles. Normally you'd use a fancier piece of flashing for a application like this. I think just a piece of drip edge should be absolutely fine. It may not be as aesthetically pleasing as a nice piece of flashing, but functionally it should do much the same job. So the first thing I'm going to do is get the drip edge installed on the bottom. Fortunately, because this is such a small roof, I'm never going to have to join pieces together. Just one piece will span across the full width or length of any of these edges. I do have some tin snips that I should be able to cut this drip edge with, and then we've also got some galvanized roof nails, which is what we're actually going to use to attach this to the roof. One challenge I am going to run into when it comes to nailing on the shingles, you can see inside it's just this 1/2 inch plywood that is going to be sort of the nailing surface. So all those nails are going to poke through. So I need to decide what to do there. These nails that I've got here are 1.25 inches. I've also got some others with some like a plastic washer kind of built in to spread out the load. So I think they're the ones I want to use. I may end up putting some sort of furring strips inside here as a nailing surface, but I want to think about that some more. And we'll start just by getting this drip edge installed. So these are the shingles that I managed to pick up at Home Depot. You can see the packaging is kind of torn on that side, but if I flip it over, you can see it was kind of torn open. Some of these shingles are pretty badly damaged. I'm going to open this pack up and see what we got. But essentially, the plan is to get the shingles on the roof. So here's what I've got in terms of the progress so far. I should say we're not using ice and water shield. We just didn't think it was necessary on a roof of this size in this application. Maybe we'll come to regret that, but that was the decision we made. So I've got the tar paper on. It's 15-pound tar paper. It's essentially overlapped for about 2 feet in the middle. This roof is 48 inches that way. It's a 212 slope, give or take. So ideally you'd have 2 layers of the tar paper all the way over. I figured we've got enough of an overlap there, and on such a small roof, I think it's going to be okay. I've got the drip edge on. You can see it's under the tar paper on this bottom edge, but the drip edge is over the tar paper on the top edge, on the side edge, sorry. On the top edge, I've left it deliberately long. I also did leave the tar paper a little long as well, and I did that on the side, so I sort of looped it round a little bit. Not sure if that's the right way to do it, but I'm hoping that'll help. So that way any water on here can flow all the way down. So my next step is I need to get a starter strip of shingles, and I kind of want to do one along the bottom and one up each side, I think, as well. I have never done this before, and I'm using a combination of like online research notes and Diana's notes from her Yes Tomorrow course, as well as manufacturer instructions and things like that. So I'm just gonna kind of muddle through and see what happens. I think once I've got the first course on, I will snap some lines up the side, which will give me the lines I need for everything else. Shingles are all on the roof. That took me, I don't know, a couple of hours maybe to get everything on there. It wasn't too bad. The hardest part, to be honest, was because they're such short runs, but they're slightly longer than one shingle piece. Every single row required cutting, but I think they went on okay. So I did an overhang as required at the front. There's like a bitumen or something under there, so I've just got some weight on here just to try and press these down and really seal that front edge. There's just a little layer at the front there, and once you press it down, it seems to stick. So I've just put some weight on these for a while, and it's nice and warm in the sun, which is really helping. I've done an overlap at the sides, and I think that's turned out pretty tidy there. And the top was a little challenging because I needed not a full course as the final course. So I had to trim this one at the top because that was too long, and then put a thinner course on at the top. I don't know if that's the right way to do it. I'm sure if you had a ridge cap, that would solve a lot of these problems, but we don't. So I'm sort of debating now how to finish this, this front edge. I have a piece here of the drip edge that I've been using, and you can see I cut these pieces here long just to give myself some kind of space to play with. But I think what I'm going to do is actually cut those off flush and just run this drip edge up to kind of that level there. So it's really sort of on the shingles on top as much as possible. That will really only leave an edge, I guess, flush with the side. It's hard to get on camera, but flush with the side there. And I think that will be good. So I'm going to try and cut this piece and tuck this corner round. I don't know if I can tuck that corner down as well. I might try that and see if that will work. But basically just cut down there, fold that down, fold that in, and cut that off. Same on the other side. And then put this piece of drip edge on there. Again, it's designed as drip edge, so it's got that kind of like textured edge there. It's really not designed, I guess, for being on display. But for this type of application, I think it's going to work just fine. Hard trying to find just the right way to do this that's going to look tight. I think really what I need is some drip edge without this lip on it. That would make my life a ton easier here, but I don't have it, and I don't really want to go and buy a piece if I can make do with this. So I think what I'll do is just try and contour this corner to fit. I'm going to use this scrap piece and see if that's going to work. Let me get a clamp to hold that on so I can play with it. Okay, this is what that's going to look like. It's not the cleanest, but I think that's going to work. That tightens up around there quite nicely. There's no sharp edge on there to kind of catch yourself on. I can hammer that in pretty good. And then I'm going to put some screws on the top. I'm going to see if I've got some butyl tape to put under this strip as well, just to give it some waterproofing along that edge. And I'll put the screws in. You can see here I've got a nice 2x4. So if I put the screws in there, that should solve it. I've got a lot of screws inside. I decided not to go with furring strips, and so you can see all up on the ceiling here, there's just a ton of nails, poking through. So I'm going to have to angle grind those off later, but I decided that was going to be a much quicker and much easier route forward than trying to put furring strips there. I may at the end, if I've got some spare OSB, put another sheet of OSB up in there just to provide a flat surface and protect a little bit more, but we'll see. Well, I've got this front piece on and I'm actually really happy with how that turned out. It may not be the prettiest. There's a little bit of whatever here, but I think it's actually going to be really secure. So I put a bead of silicone underneath all the way along here, and then as I drove in each nail, I put some silicone around the nail once it was about halfway in, then drove it all the way in and then smeared the silicone over the top. So it's, again, not the prettiest, but I've always been a proponent of the notion that a clean sealing job or sealant job isn't necessarily the best. At least that's what I tell myself. So that front drip edge is on, which now means that any water hitting here will run off down that way. Any water hitting here will run off down this way. This isn't vertical, but it's steep enough that I'm not worried about it. It's also stained, so that's going to be fine. We've got, I think, a fairly nice transition around the corner, at least as nice as it's going to be using this drip edge rather than proper flashing for that. And then that comes down, and I've done a similar join at the bottom of here. I think the shingles on top are looking really nice. I've also squeezed some silicone into here, and over on this side, the same thing, squeezed some up inside that corner there. So there should be plenty of water protection now on top for something of this application. I also went through, and because I'm only using a 1/2 inch roof deck, but or 5/8 inch roof deck, but 1 1/4 inch nails, I've also been through and cut off all of the nails where they're poking through with the angle grinder. Now that does mean in theory we don't have as much binding force because the nails aren't fully seated in a deck. They were poking through. However, they are ring shank nails, and the ringed section is within that plywood deck. So again, given the size of the roof, I'm not super concerned. Also, I made a point of making sure that any shingles that are on this line got a nail here into the 2x4, which goes all the way down. So they sink really nicely. Same on the other side and same in the middle. And because there's only 2 sets of shingles on each row across, that means every set of shingles has at least 1, if not 2, nails into a very secure 2x4. Again, wouldn't necessarily do this on a residential project. This isn't how you would do it on a house, but this is not a house. It is a storage cabinet. It is probably overkill anyway, but it's been a fun little experience to learn how to do this. I am going to declare that roof complete for this. So the next thing that I can do today is get the house wrap on. So this, you've probably seen it on buildings that go on. It's basically a waterproofing layer. It's not completely a waterproof. It will allow moisture through from inside to outside. Not really a huge issue here. This is not going to be an airtight structure by any means, but it will provide some additional protection to the OSB. So the OSB that we've used for the siding is not waterproof. If it does get wet, it will kind of start to fall apart. The layers will start to bubble up and come apart. So I do want to get that on. The wind was not cooperating there as I tried to get the house wrap on, but I managed to get it done. The instructions did say to use some 1-inch crown staples or the plastic headed nails, and I do have those, but I decided to stick with the T50 staples that I've got. As soon as the furring strips go on, they're going to be every 12 inches or so down here. I think that's going to anchor that on absolutely fine. And so I think for the time being, those staples will hold it. But it's doubled up most of the way because the roll is 3 feet wide. So in order to cover the whole thing, I've got an overlap of about 2 feet. So that should provide some really, really good water protection. If it does rain between now and when we get the siding on, hopefully that'll really help. Between that and the roof, I think this has been some good progress today. It's been about a week or so since I last had a chance to work on this project, but today I'm hoping to make some good progress. You can see here I've already started adding the furring strips, so we are going to be using board and batten siding on this. And over there on the tractor you can see the boards and some of the battens that I milled up last week on the sawmill. We've done those out of, I think, 3/4, 5/8 inch pine. So they're quite thin for a project like this where I want to keep the weight down. They're not going to be long boards. I'm good with that. The great thing about board and batten is that you can install the siding from using green lumber. So lumber that is not yet dried. And that is very much not dried. That was a log just a week ago, and you can tell it's wet to the touch. In terms of how to install it, you add horizontal furring strips. So these are actually pieces that I ripped down on the table saw, from some of our 2x4s that were kind of crooked. They had a good bend to them. I've done the one side, now it's time to do the other sides around here. Still haven't built the door yet, but that's another project I need to do. But I'm hoping to get some boards installed today. Furring strips are all on now, and it's time to start getting on the board and batten siding, specifically the boards. So this is the pile of boards that came off the mill just a few days ago, and what I've just done is I've just run them through the table saw over there to rip them down to take about 1/2 inch of width off. And the reason for that is twofold. One is I've actually changed the plans slightly. My original plans had a bit of a gap between the boards, and we decided not to put that gap in. We want to have those butting up tight against each other because they will shrink. These are green, these are very wet. I had to use the saw on bypass mode so that it didn't trigger the safety mechanism. And the second reason is they're pretty stringy. When they come off the mill, it can be really stringy sometimes, and trying to get a nice tight joint out of those would just be a pain. So now they've come off the table saw, you get this really nice, clean, straight edge, and that's going to make my life a little bit easier. So I have cut a couple of them down to length, so these are now the right length to fit on here. And these I still expect to cup. So what cupping means is the board, as it dries, and actually you can see this one doing it a little bit, it starts just to get a bit of a curve. And what I want to do is I want to have this curve so the high spot is in the center facing away from the building, and the low spots are against the building. In other words, it's sort of cupping out away from the building in the center, not at the edges. And that means that because I'm just going to secure it using a single fastener, or a single line of fasteners down the middle, those fasteners, those screws will hold it tight against the wall, and as it tries to cup, it'll just seal itself even tighter against the furring strips. Whereas if you did it the other way around, it would try and lift off the wall in the corners, and that screw in the middle wouldn't be doing a ton to hold it tight. So that is the plan for getting this installed. I have never done this before. The rule I can tell you with the growth rings is they'll always try and straighten. So you can see here the growth rings are doing that. They will try and straighten out. I can't really do this with one hand. But essentially that line will try to become a straight line, which means these bits need to drop down, which is exactly what you see this board doing. So let me switch on to time lapse and let's get installing. It's actually been a few months since we got the storage cabinet to this stage, and we've been using it the last few months. The last thing I did was I put these boards on the outside, and when I put them on, they were soaking wet. They were fresh off the mill that day, and as you put the screws in, you could see the water coming out. They were so wet. So we put them on so they could dry. And then this summer has just rained almost non-stop. There's just been so much rain, and we just haven't had time to get back out to this and finish it in amongst all the other projects that we've been working on. But we have been able to use the cabinet. It's been working really well for us. Inside you can see we've been keeping all of our forestry gear, the chainsaws, chainsaw chaps, all the stuff for the sawmill, all the safety gear. And even despite all the torrential rain we've had, this thing has been absolutely bone dry throughout and has been a really useful storage cabinet. However, today we are ready to finally start finishing this, and I mean finishing it. We are going to take these boards back off. We've been debating how to finish it, what we want to do. In the end, what we've decided is we're going to plane these boards down. We were going to leave them rough cut originally, but we're going to plane them down, and then we're going to stain them. And then we've also got the battens that I milled and have been drying in this weather. They're going to cover up these gaps. You can see though, in the few months it's been sitting here, all of these boards were tight when I put them on. And you can see just how much the wood has shrunk to open up these gaps. Particularly on this side, there's some good gaps have emerged from where these boards were tight originally, but have opened up. And that's where this board and batten technique comes in. You put the boards on, you put them on tight, but then you put battens on to cover that gap, screwing through between the two boards, and that way it stays nice and watertight on the outside. So we're going to be taking these off. We did wash them down yesterday. They are sort of greyed at the bottom. We're going to brush them down though, and then put them through the planer and get them stained.
I'm going to be staining these boards with Benjamin Moore Arbor Court in its translucent finish in teak color. We're kind of trying to figure out whether this might be the color we do for the house siding, so we thought we would try it out first on this smaller project.
All of our boards are removed, planed, painted, and they are now back on the storage cabinet, which just leaves the battens to go. So that's what we have here. I milled these a good few months ago. They've been sitting out drying the whole time, so these are real nice and dry now. I don't remember exactly what width I did these. I think they're about 2.5, maybe 3 inches. I also did a few that are maybe a 1/2 inch narrower as well. They're going to be for any corner trim that we want, so we can get a nice corner profile. We're going to do the same thing here with running these through the thickness planer, just to remove the rough face so that they match. However, with these, we also need to treat the sides as well. So these are going to be the battens that cover the gap, which means the sides will be visible. And I did rip them down to width on the table saw, so they have got a fairly smooth side already. But again, they've greyed as they've been outside drying. So we're just going to use a random Orbital sander to just flatten these down a little bit. We're not aiming for perfection here. We're just trying to take off any of the discoloration and some of the coarseness. I've got a 150 grit pad on here. That's probably too fine, but it's just what's on there at the moment. We'll give it a go with that, see how we get on. And then once they're sanded on both sides, we'll run through the planer. We will then cut them all to size on the, sort of measure them up against the storage cabinet. Then we will paint them and install them. Well, the storage cabinet is complete, and this has been a really fun project. It is, I guess, the first time we've built something start to finish like this, and there's definitely a few things that I learned along the way, but overall, I am really happy with how this turned out. It has been useful, and that honestly is the #1 goal. A couple of things that I learned: never done roofing before. This was kind of new to me, and we used shingles. It was kind of fun learning about how to do the shingles, get all the drip edge sorted, make it all waterproof. It clearly worked because we have had a record wet summer here in Vermont, and this thing has been bone dry inside. So really happy with how that turned out. Also really impressed with this board and batten. It's been a couple of weeks now since we stained this siding, and we think it looks really, really good. This is a definite contender for the colour that we might use on some of the other buildings, including possibly the utility and the house. Also, kind of really like the board and batten siding. We did this on here because it was just a very utilitarian kind of siding, but actually I'm really happy with how this turned out. The look is pretty sleek, actually. So we were planning on a horizontal siding for the utility, but who knows? Maybe we will consider the board and batten. So overall, this project has been super good fun, really enjoyed it, but most of all, it has been really useful to have this storage here next to the sawmill. I hope you enjoyed this video series, and if so, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and we will see you in the next video.